Welcome back to The Breakdown with me, NLW. It's a daily podcast on macro, Bitcoin, and the big picture power shifts remaking our world.
What's going on, guys? It is Friday, February 7th, and today we are doing a very janky Friday 5. Before we get into that, however, if you are enjoying The Breakdown, please go subscribe to it, give it a rating, give it a review, or if you want to dive deeper into the conversation, come join us on the Breakers Discord. You can find a link in the show notes or go to bit.ly/breakdownpod. All right, friends. Well, as you can hear from my voice, things have not gotten better over here, but I didn't feel like I could do 2 AI episodes in a row, so we are going to persevere. And Scott, my normal co-host for the Friday 5, was out this week, so we're just going to do our own little version of a Friday 5 Frog Voice edition. Kicking it off is tariffs and the Sovereign Wealth Fund. This week started with what was potentially world-changing macro news after President Trump announced tariffs on the top 3 trading partners for the U.S. over the weekend. The 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico were quickly walked back, with a 1-month delay agreed on Monday. However, increased tariffs on Chinese goods went into effect. Removal of the de minimis expectation on directly imported consumer goods threw the postal system into disarray for a few days, but that also seems to be back on track. Beijing appears to be coming to the negotiating table, but the most recent reports suggest that Trump is in no rush to get a deal done. Also on Monday, Trump signed an executive order to establish a sovereign wealth fund. Macro analysts were somewhat perplexed as it's basically unprecedented for a deficit country to operate such a fund, and details were scant. But Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick was previously on record outlining a plan to take an equity stake in large government contractors. Suffice it to say, there are lots of questions around what this might actually look like. The one thing that's clear is that no one exactly knows how to make sense of Trump 2.0. The administration seems to be adopting the strategy of flooding the zone, the idea being to move at a rapid pace and clog the media with so many stories they can't even report it all. There's no signs that the administration will slow down anytime soon. Vice President J.D. Vance said, "This is the new normal. Expect this rapid-fire breakneck pace to continue for 4 full years." Already, many close observers have had their expectations defied. For example, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did have a stated goal to reshape the global trade and financial system around a decoupling from China. But when it came to tariffs, he was much more interested in a slow and predictable rollout. He also didn't seem particularly enthusiastic about the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. What people are remembering is that volatility of all forms is going to go up under this Trump administration. Bloomberg reported yesterday that the demand for hedges are through the roof. Mentor Q tweeted, "Traders are dialing back position sizes and tightening risk management as Trump's policies inject more volatility into markets. With uncertainty running high, staying nimble is key. Market reactions can escalate fast." Now, of course, BlackRock has been out there selling the investment case for Bitcoin as a hedge against unpredictable governments. Alas, for some crypto folks, the story of this week is that this is not going to be as simple as electing the first crypto president and watching digital assets go to the moon. Next up on the Friday 5, we have to turn it over to the SEC overhaul. Outside the White House, the policies are far less controversial but no less rapid. The SEC has followed through on plans to quickly reshape the agency around a new pro-crypto stance. The first order of business has been establishing a crypto task force dedicated to figuring out what needs to change and how to do it. As head of that group, Commissioner Hester Peirce released a mission statement on Tuesday that really set the tone. The one passage that I think really encapsulates what we should expect from the SEC is this: spinning up coins and tokens is easy. If people want to buy a token or product that lacks a clear long-term value proposition, they should feel free to, but should not be surprised if someday the price drops. In this country, people generally have a right to make decisions for themselves. But the counterpart to that wonderful American liberty is the equally wonderful American expectation that people must decide for themselves, not look to mama government to tell them what to do or not to do, nor to bail them out when they do something that turns out badly. What's clear is that there is a complete sea change going on in the agency. The brutal crackdown cloaked in the frame of investor protection is over and a new regulatory attitude has begun. One of the most fleshed out parts of the statement was a proposal for an ICO safe harbor applied retroactively as bridging policy. Peirce asked token issuers for 2 concessions in exchange for immunity: provide reasonable disclosures and agree to the SEC's jurisdiction in the case of fraud. Reports surfaced later in the week that the Crypto Enforcement Division has been gutted, with many of the lawyers reassigned to other divisions. It sounds, for example, like Gary Gensler's chief litigation counsel has been moved to a desk job, with many crypto lawyers happy to see him gone. Of course, real change is going to take a long time, but this speech and the attitude it suggests are a great start. On the same day as the SEC statement, we also saw the first press conference from crypto czar David Sachs. He reiterated the need for regulatory clarity, recognized that digital capital markets were inevitable, and underscored stablecoins as a tool for US dollar dominance. The unified take from crypto Twitter was that this press conference could have been an email. Sachs even doubled back to the podium to mention that the Bitcoin reserve would be coming and was separate from the sovereign wealth fund. However, he noted that the Crypto Council hasn't even formed, let alone begun discussing the reserve. Scott Melker called it an announcement of an announcement, and that seemed to capture the vibe of the industry. The more important part of the press conference was the assembled senior lawmakers announcing a bicameral working group on crypto legislation. Leaders from the House Committees on Agriculture and Financial Services, as well as the Senate Committees on Agriculture and Banking, were present. This signaled to many in the industry that Republican leadership was serious about getting crypto legislation done as a top priority. The stablecoin bill remains the easier lift, and discussion drafts have been introduced in both chambers of Congress. Market structure remains an open question, but FIT21 seems to be viewed as a solid starting point.
Hello, friends. I am thrilled to share that Ledger is once again partnering and sponsoring with The Breakdown. Many of you know, but for those of you who don't, Ledger is the most secure hardware wallet for your crypto and logins. It's trusted by 7 million users and secures 20% of the world's digital assets. What's more, Ledger is a lot more than wallets. Over the recent years, they've built a comprehensive ecosystem of products and services, all of which are designed to make digital ownership more secure and accessible. You can buy your Bitcoin with Ledger and Ledger Live, and so much more. Basically, not only do they want to keep your assets secure, they want you to be able to do more with them. Ledger's newest devices, the Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, introduced the world's first secure touchscreens, making it easier and safer to manage your transactions and assets. Alongside Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, the company also launched the Ledger Security Key app, offering a safer alternative to traditional passwords and enhancing your digital security. If you are in this space, you owe it to yourself to at least check out Ledger and their ecosystem, what they have available to you. So thanks once again to Ledger for sponsoring the show.
Washington looks like it will be a madhouse for at least the next few months. But once Congress gets down to business, it does seem like crypto bills might be near the top of the list. One of the big noticeable parts of the administration's first crypto press conference was that the market absolutely hated it. Bitcoin plunged, and this was the catalyst for the biggest leg down in altcoins for the week. The general read was that traders expected big clear news about the Bitcoin strategic reserve, but got very little. The move was so noticeable that industry leaders took to Twitter in an attempt to shift the narrative. Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse noted that a commitment to passing legislation around crypto clarity is an extremely big deal, and got a bullseye response from Sachs. You gotta remember though, this was actually the first time there's been a dedicated government press conference on crypto that didn't involve a criminal investigation. Sachs said he would be ushering in a, quote, golden age for digital assets, which is a term you're going to be hearing a lot more as it's already found its way into the title of a House hearing scheduled for next week. However, I think it's also pretty clear that at this point, pretty much every announcement is going to fall short of expectations, because the expectations are so ridiculously high. We are about to get back to the very boring work of committee hearings, administrative rulemaking, and congressional horse trading to establish regulatory clarity. It's not the catalyst for big green candles. Instead, it's the sort of thing we'll look back on in a year's time and realize has completely changed the industry. Over in Congress, much of the week has been taken up by a pair of hearings on debanking. We heard from numerous witnesses from the crypto industry, as well as bankers, lawyers, and academics. The big picture message was that debanking and Operation Chokepoint 2.0 were 100% real and a big problem. Any pushback on this point has completely disappeared. Elizabeth Warren even came to the Senate hearing with a full game plan to acknowledge that debanking was real and used the fact to argue that the CFPB is a critical bulwark against it. At one stage, without a shred of irony, she said, "This shouldn't be happening. We need to figure out why and who is responsible." One of the interesting things to emerge out of the Senate hearing was two very partisan takes on the issue. Republicans are acknowledging their crypto firms were debanked, but are choosing to focus on conservatives losing banking access for their political views. Democrats aren't making the case that people should have a right to access the financial system, but are instead calling to establish an appeals process after debanking occurs. Neither side really seem to be engaging with the fact that debanking is fundamentally an issue of liberty. Nathan McCauley, the CEO of Anchorage Digital, made the point that debanking is a, quote, betrayal of the bargain that is the American experiment. He highlighted that the fundamental work to be done is not about reforming banking regulation, but about restoring trust in the banking system. Ultimately, the hearings mostly served to put the methods of Operation Chokepoint 2.0 on the record. Both hearings featured experienced lawyers discussing how regulators would threaten examinations and endless compliance requests if banks so much as thought about dealing with the crypto industry. What's great about this is that it's now very clear that Washington accepts that Operation Chokepoint 2.0 was a real thing that happened. Now, if you ask me about my optimism, about whether there will be bipartisan policy to make sure there isn't a third iteration, that is perhaps a little bit lower. Finally today, speaking of getting Operation Chokepoint 2.0 on the record, the FDIC released a truckload of Freedom of Information documents on Wednesday. 790 pages of correspondence with banks was released along with internal emails. The release was far too detailed to get into in any real depth, but Paul Grewal, Caitlin Long, and Scott Johnson have pulled out key documents on Twitter. These documents show the FDIC was far more active in suppressing crypto banking than previously understood. We don't know exactly how many requests this packet of documents represents, but it seems like much more than the 24 they had acknowledged in previous releases. One striking point is that every single request to provide crypto services was turned down. Many banks attempted to work with the regulators for months, responding to concerns in a pointless exercise. We also have snide comments from banking regulators in internal discussions, and clear evidence that the FDIC was actively preventing banks from so much as providing fiat accounts to crypto companies. Just last week, reporting suggested the acting chair of the FDIC hadn't seen evidence of a conspiracy against crypto actually existed. Now he seems to accept that something very serious has happened and has committed to reforming crypto banking supervision. Now, where all this came from was a little strange. The document included much more material than you would normally expect, and the explanation came on Thursday, when Paul Grewal published the transcript from the court hearing back in January. To say that the judge in the hearing was irate would be an understatement. Catherine Minarek, the chief legal officer at Uniswap Labs, wrote, "This is wild for a federal court transcript, even more so when the government is on the receiving end. Something went seriously off the rails within the FDIC for them to be in this spot." The hearing involved allegations that the FDIC was evading freedom of information and possibly even destroying documents. The judge tried for several minutes to get a direct answer out of the FDIC lawyer without much success. They wouldn't explain why the request had been interpreted so narrowly or who had made that decision. It came out that a litigation hold had not been placed on documents related to the case, ensuring that they would be retained. The judge told the FDIC lawyer, "Do you understand that if I find, and there's going to be an investigation, that any documents were destroyed, or if we can't figure out whether any documents were destroyed, you guys are going to come in for some serious sanctions?" Finance lawyer Scott Johnson said, "It is truly extraordinary to see a federal judge excoriate a federal agency's counsel in the manner he does so here." In other words, issues at the FDIC are no longer about a judgment call on what crypto banking regulation should be. It's now turning into a full-blown scandal where the agency is found to be acting with blatant disregard for the law and contempt for the judiciary. It seems like we're about to get a huge amount of sunlight on what's gone on at the FDIC for the past few years. And that, friends, is where we will end this episode. Appreciate you bearing with me. Until next time, be safe and take care of each other. Peace